I almost walked out of the cafe after waiting 43 minutes for a woman I had never met. My coffee had gone cold, the server had stopped pretending not to pity me, and I was already rehearsing the joke I would tell my coworkers about being stood up. Then the front door opened, sunlight spilled across the floor, and a woman paused just inside the entrance. She looked around the room until her eyes met mine, smiled with a sadness that somehow felt familiar, and quietly said, "You have kind eyes." In that single moment, I had no idea that those 4 words would uncover a truth that would force me to confront my past, question everything I believed about love, and give 2 broken lives a chance to heal. Before we begin, if you believe in kindness, forgiveness, and second chances, please like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe for more heartfelt stories. Your support helps us bring more inspiring stories to life. For almost 3 years, my life had become a carefully organized routine designed to keep loneliness from becoming unbearable. My name is Owen Mercer, and after a painful engagement ended because the woman I planned to marry admitted she had never really loved me, I stopped believing that people stayed. Every morning I worked as a physical therapist at a rehabilitation clinic, helping strangers learn to walk again after accidents and surgeries. Every afternoon I visited my widowed mother, who insisted on pretending she didn't need help around the house even while secretly leaving broken shelves and squeaky doors for me to fix. Every weekend I hiked the same trails, ordered food from the same diner, and convinced myself that predictable was better than painful. My younger sister, Brielle, refused to let me disappear into that quiet existence. She believed love still existed somewhere beyond my fear, and after months of relentless encouragement, she finally convinced me to try a blind date arranged through a friend from her office. She promised the woman was genuine, intelligent, and kind. She laughed when I admitted I was nervous and reminded me that one disappointing evening couldn't possibly be worse than spending another year convincing myself I wasn't meant to be loved again. That was how I ended up sitting in a small downtown cafe surrounded by conversations that had nothing to do with me. Every couple who walked in seemed happier than I remembered happiness could look. I checked my phone repeatedly. No messages. No explanation. Eventually embarrassment replaced hope. I paid for my untouched second coffee, stood from my chair, and reached for my jacket. Then she arrived. She wasn't dramatically beautiful in the way magazines described beauty. She looked real. Her dark auburn hair was pulled back loosely, a few strands escaping into the breeze that followed her inside. Her pale green sweater looked slightly wrinkled as though she had rushed to get there. She carried herself with the exhaustion of someone who had fought invisible battles for a long time. Yet her eyes held extraordinary warmth. When she apologized for being late, she explained that she had stopped to help an elderly man whose grocery bags had burst open across the sidewalk. She seemed genuinely worried that I wouldn't believe her until she noticed the uncertainty on my face and laughed softly at herself. Then she looked directly into my eyes and said they seemed kind enough to understand. Something inside me relaxed. Her name was Evelyn Hart. The conversation began awkwardly, as blind dates usually do, but before long we were talking about childhood memories, favorite books, embarrassing first jobs, and the strange ways heartbreak changes people. She admitted she had canceled dozens of opportunities to meet new people because she couldn't trust herself after losing someone important. I admitted I had almost left before she arrived. She smiled sadly and confessed she almost turned around outside the cafe because she was afraid another disappointment would confirm what she secretly believed, that happiness belonged to everyone except her. Instead of pretending confidence, we shared honesty. Hours slipped away unnoticed. As afternoon sunlight stretched across the windows, I found myself laughing harder than I had in years. It wasn't because she was trying to impress me. It was because she made ordinary moments feel meaningful. When we finally walked outside, she thanked me for waiting. I replied that I was glad I hadn't given up too soon. Neither of us realized how much those words would matter. Over the next several weeks, our friendship grew naturally. We visited museums, explored farmers' markets, volunteered together at community events, and discovered that both of us preferred quiet conversations over crowded parties. She adored stray animals and somehow remembered the names of every person she met. She noticed details other people ignored, like the nervous teenager sitting alone or the exhausted cashier forcing a smile through a difficult shift. Watching her kindness made me want to become a better version of myself. But there were moments when she disappeared emotionally. Sometimes during lunch she would stare into the distance after receiving a phone call. Sometimes she canceled plans at the last minute without explanation. Whenever I asked if everything was all right, she insisted she was simply tired. I wanted to believe her. Still, something didn't fit. One Saturday afternoon, while we were planting flowers during a neighborhood volunteer project, I noticed a little girl run across the park shouting Evelyn's name. The child couldn't have been older than 6. She threw her arms around Evelyn with complete trust. My heart stopped. Evelyn froze before kneeling to hug the little girl. Seconds later a middle-aged woman hurried over, gently leading the child away while apologizing. The look that passed between Evelyn and the older woman wasn't ordinary. It carried years of shared pain. When I asked who the little girl was, Evelyn's smile disappeared. She quietly said it was complicated. That answer haunted me. The following week she became increasingly distant. Messages grew shorter. Phone calls ended quickly. The warmth between us remained, but something invisible had stepped into the space we were building together. Finally I asked whether I had done something wrong. She shook her head. Then tears filled her eyes before she whispered that I deserved the truth. We sat together on a park bench beneath enormous maple trees while children laughed in the distance. She told me 6 years earlier she had married the love of her life. They dreamed of raising a family together until a distracted driver caused a devastating crash. Her husband died instantly. She survived. Their newborn daughter survived. But the accident left Evelyn with severe injuries requiring months of rehabilitation and years of emotional recovery. While she remained hospitalized, grief overwhelmed both families. Her husband's parents blamed her. Her own parents believed she was too emotionally fragile to care for an infant. Temporary custody slowly became permanent through legal battles she was too broken to fight. The little girl I had seen was her daughter. She visited every week. She attended birthdays, school plays, medical appointments. But legally she had become little more than a familiar visitor in her own child's life. I couldn't speak. The weight of her loneliness suddenly explained every hidden sadness I'd witnessed. She admitted she never mentioned it because people usually assumed the worst. They imagined abandonment instead of tragedy. She expected me to leave. Instead I reached for her hand. Not because I knew how to fix anything, but because no one should carry that pain alone. For the first time since we met, she cried without trying to hide it. I believed honesty had brought us closer. I was wrong. 3 days later I received an anonymous envelope at my office. Inside were photographs. Pictures of Evelyn embracing another man. Holding his hand. Smiling together. The dates printed on the photographs were recent. There was also a short typed message. You deserve to know the truth before she lies to you too. Everything inside me collapsed. Every fear I'd buried after my broken engagement rushed back at once. I stared at those pictures until they blurred. When Evelyn called that evening, I couldn't hide my confusion. Instead of becoming defensive, she quietly asked to meet me. The next afternoon we met at the botanical gardens. She looked exhausted before I even handed her the envelope. The moment she saw the photographs, her face turned pale. Then she closed her eyes. The man was her attorney. The photos had been taken after court hearings involving custody negotiations for her daughter. Someone had deliberately photographed moments that appeared romantic while hiding the truth. She immediately showed me documents, emails, and court schedules. Everything matched. Someone wanted us apart. The obvious question remained. Who? The answer arrived days later in the cruelest possible way. Her late husband's older brother confronted us outside the courthouse. His bitterness had consumed him for years. He believed allowing Evelyn to rebuild her life somehow dishonored his brother's memory. He admitted sending the photographs. He admitted spreading lies. He admitted hoping I would leave before Evelyn found happiness again. The confession shattered everyone present. Even his own parents looked horrified. His mother burst into tears as she realized how much damage grief had allowed to grow inside their family. For years they had convinced themselves they were protecting their granddaughter. Instead they had been protecting their pain. That confrontation changed everything. Not immediately. Healing never happens immediately. But truth finally had room to breathe. Over the following months conversations replaced accusations. Therapists joined family meetings. Lawyers became mediators instead of enemies. The little girl, Lily, slowly gained more time with her mother. I watched Evelyn rediscover pieces of herself she thought had disappeared forever. Then came the hardest day of all. The judge reviewed years of evidence, family evaluations, counseling reports, and Lily's own wishes. No dramatic speeches followed. No perfect ending arrived all at once. Instead the court approved shared parenting arrangements designed around Lily's emotional well-being. It wasn't everything Evelyn had dreamed of. But it was hope. Real hope. When Lily ran into her mother's arms outside the courthouse, neither of them could stop crying. Neither could I. Months passed. Life settled into something wonderfully ordinary. Homework at the kitchen table. Weekend picnics. School concerts. Family breakfasts filled with burnt pancakes and laughter. One afternoon Lily looked up at me while we were building a birdhouse and innocently asked whether I planned to stay forever. Children ask impossible questions with remarkable simplicity. I looked toward Evelyn. She smiled through tears. My answer came easily. Yes. Not because forever is guaranteed. Because love chooses to stay every single day. On a bright spring afternoon exactly 1 year after our blind date, I asked Evelyn to return to the same café where we first met. She laughed the moment she realized where we were. We ordered the same drinks. Sat at the same table. Waited as sunlight spilled across the floor exactly as it had before. I reached into my pocket, held out a small ring, and reminded her that the first thing she had ever said to me was that I had kind eyes. Then I confessed the truth she never knew. The reason I waited 43 minutes that day wasn't because I was patient. It was because something deep inside me hoped that maybe life still had one beautiful surprise left. She laughed through tears before whispering that she almost never came inside because fear had nearly convinced her to walk away. Two frightened strangers had almost missed the greatest blessing of their lives simply because pain had taught them to expect disappointment. She said yes. Lily clapped louder than anyone else in the café. Even strangers applauded. For once, no one seemed embarrassed by tears. They simply understood. Our wedding happened months later beneath clear afternoon skies surrounded by friends, family, and people who had witnessed pieces of our journey. There were empty chairs in our hearts for those we had lost, but there was also overwhelming gratitude for everyone still standing beside us. Grief had not disappeared. Scars remained. Yet they no longer defined our future. Sometimes people ask whether I believe in fate. I don't know. What I believe is this. Kindness changes directions. Patience saves moments. Forgiveness unlocks doors that anger keeps permanently closed. And sometimes the greatest love story begins after you've already decided to stand up and leave. Speech balloon special request: before the story ends, tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were in this situation? If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe for more meaningful and inspiring stories. Your support encourages us to keep creating stories that touch hearts around the world. Life has a remarkable way of rewarding hearts that refuse to become bitter. The people who hurt us do not deserve to control the rest of our story, and the disappointments we survive should never convince us to stop believing in love. Sometimes healing arrives quietly, disguised as an ordinary afternoon, an unexpected conversation, or 4 simple words from a stranger who sees the goodness you almost forgot existed inside yourself. Never underestimate the power of kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances, because the life you think you've lost may simply be waiting for the courage to remain seated a little longer.